it can be difficult to get people to really jump into a recorded session. So thank you for being here, Adora. I'll certainly keep you updated on all that. And we have our general strike going on. For whatever reason, almost like we've had 4 sessions of these. I think 3 out of the 4 we end up talking about democracy and sortition. So I think that definitely will come up some more today. Ooh, rent strike guys here. Kyle will let you check in next. And I just again, I'm in California. I work with coalition building, or general strike with 5051, with how do we deal with make cooperatives and more collaboration. So yeah, really excited to be here, and definitely we'll talk some more about sortition. I have lots of questions. Um, Rent strike, Kyle, you want to check in real quick? Say how you're doing.
Yeah, let me just get this on here. Huh, that's weird. Keep trying to get it to access my camera, but that's shutting off.
Huh.
I guess that's a kink that'll get worked out later.
It should work. I mean, I've seen you on camera multiple times today already.
Right?
So you would think it would work. I don't know why it wouldn't, especially when it's working for others. Maybe it could
I
be
think
my
Discord's
screensaver.
stolen control. Oh,
I took away my
I mean,
screensaver. Maybe that'll help you. Oh yeah,
no,
there we go.
Discord had control of it. I was still in video in another call.
Ah, got it, got it. Perfect. Awesome. Maybe you want to check in real quick, and then we'll go to Ian.
Yeah, I'm Kyle. I'm doing well. I've been organizing a rent strike since 2022. I've been organizing in general in some capacity since 2008, when I turned 18 to enter the job market just in time for the financial crash. Radicalized me right out the gate. And yeah, my last organization was R2S, organizing for pro Palestine, and now I've come along to hopefully help with some general organizational rules. I don't want power, but I do know the algorithm or publicly publishable uh, formula that you can use to adjudicate something fairly, where I can at least provide a range of options for you to put to a vote. And I know the pros and cons to list them off. I've made organizational structure, things like Conway's Law, or power laws for growth like Zipf's law, or any of the fundamental constants, a bit of a speciality and focus of interest.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's go on over to Ian. Ian, you're from the general strike, but you also love sortition and stuff. So yeah, jump in.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Right on, yeah. My name is Ian. I am from Idaho. I'm a nurse practitioner and epidemiologist there, and interested in having a more just economy and society. And particularly, I'm really passionate about sortition as a way to help um, scale democracy without resulting in a political ruling class.
Beautiful. And I'll just say that I think it's very interesting that I had never heard about sortition before a couple weeks ago, and I've been involved in movement organizing for many, many years. And the fact that it's coming from multiple locations and multiple movements and multiple groups all at the same time means it needs to be taken very seriously. It's very exciting. So, I personally am a big fan of getting agreement on topics, but I'm also open to just do rounds and just do open discussion. So, is there any preference with this with y'all?
Have
No?
any meetings on?
No preference.
No preference? Well, let's. If there's no preference, I'm gonna lean towards trying to get agreement on a topic. So, obviously, there's an interest in, you know, sortition is jumping right into that. I have questions. We all have a lot of interest in that. We could also go for some just open discussion, or we could do, something else. Is there any particular preference or other topics? I mean, I'm even down to talk about homelessness and so many things going on there too.
Looking to create a reporter or broadcaster or documenter slash note taker formalized role within the server. And also, I'm looking to address a wiki so that when we have meetings like this or take notes like this, there's somewhere that these tables can be contributed to.
Yeah.
And also creating job postings for volunteer positions based on skill sets that we have been having trouble filling, even if they're unpaid positions. just still having them formally posted can be really, really valuable for people for knowing what we need in terms of skills for them to grow.
Agreed. Yes. I'm a big fan of just like more clarity on decision making and logistics for organizing. 5051 is very new movement as well, and interesting how structured it has already become, which is somewhat concerning. And then also in relationship to GSUS, getting things more formalized would also be very good on that side. But as far as this meeting goes, everything is automatically documented, automatically recorded, automatically broadcast, and automatically we'll do notes and transcripts and all that stuff. So that makes it a lot very, very easy. Speaking of which, I should get one more recording going. And then does anyone object to maybe starting with like democracy and sortition as like a starting point? And then maybe we could go into some more logistics after that.
Sounds great.
For example, the logistics, sortition would be okay. Understanding sortition, understanding questions, understanding decentralized, and then logistics might be okay. How do you actually document and present it to a group like 5051 or General Strike to actually implement it within an existing movement organization? So topic 1, any objections? The desired outcome would be something like understanding sortition in relationship to decentralized democracy, etc., etc. So
How about some precedents, like precedents of sortitions in practice? Like I think jury duty is a precedent that we're all familiar with for sortition.
Beautiful. Yeah, precedents and examples of sortition. Very, very good. So view up. All right, so let's usually do like a half an hour. I'll put out the timer, try to remind ourselves after half an hour. Take some goals from sociocracy, get us organized. So topic 1, let's go. Who wants to start? Kind of introduce sortition. I can introduce a little decentralized democracy.
I can introduce it briefly.
Beautiful.
I mean, we've kind of talked about this a little bit before, Jay, but kind of the way that I see it is at small scales, everyone kind of agrees what democracy is. Everyone gets an equal say in group decisions, right? But as you scale democracy up, where there's too many people or too many decisions or complexity of decisions is too great, you need some method to scale it. And the way that people are most familiar with is elections. But elections are problematic for all sorts of reasons, and we know that they tend to elevate like a political ruling class. And ancient political philosophers saw elections as aristocratic and not in fact democratic. Sortition is a way to ensure that you get a representative sample. It's random selection for choosing decision makers, which we know from empirical science is a great way to get a representative sample when you need to scale something, when you need to understand a phenomenon that's too great for you to otherwise understand.
Great. For me, understanding decentralized democracy in relationship to sortition is, directly empowering people. Ooh, let's get these links to make their own decisions. That the people reserve the right to make decisions in and of themselves. So, for example, us as a group of 5-10 people could just make a proposal, make a decision, document that, send it out to the world, and then other groups could follow with that, review the decision, and so you could kind of decentralize, and you have enough groups that all make the decision together, can eventually build up to a decentralized laws framework. So my main question for sortition is how do you start it without a centralized model? That's my main question. And otherwise, I have no problem with the centralized model. Let's just create the centralized authority to oversee the sortition process, and then we just do that. We actually talked last week about even creating a centralized social contract, like a cryptographic contract that could actually automate the entire process of sortition, which is really interesting. So anyway, those are some of my questions. I certainly have other ones, but yes.
A key flaw with sortition is that you will end up bringing people who have no expertise whatsoever into the decision-making process. In some situations, sortition is extremely desirable because you want an impartial, random guy on the street answer for it. But that's typically when you're selecting something like a jury, a group of people to check each other. If you end up selecting just one guy or one lady through sortition, you'll typically end up bringing in a lot of biases.
I think that's a fair criticism, but I would just say that, you know, you're. It's not like we're randomly picking someone to fly the plane. You know, we're not. If you get a randomly selected group of people, we're not like going to pick one of them to fly the plane. If they're cooperating as a group to decide who flies the plane, they're going to pick a pilot. And so if there's something that needs expertise, there's no reason that a randomly selected group can't use their group discussion to identify the expert that they want to carry out the actual task itself. But the pilot shouldn't get to pick where the destination is. The passengers should pick where the destination is and then hire the pilot to get them
In terms of going around, if Andorra wants to jump in, then we go to Rich and then John. Just keep. We'll do. And then of course, if you want to raise your hand, you can always jump in whenever.
Okay. Sure. This is the first time I'm hearing about this. I guess you said it was how they did it in Athens, like ancient Greece.
It's election by lottery.
Yeah. The reason I bring that up is, if I remember my ancient history, which I may or may not, there was a limited number of people who were actually eligible to be considered for positions during that time. When I look at it from a security perspective and from an implementation perspective, I see something similar happening, whether you want it to or not. Basically, right now, we've got politicians being drawn from Harvard and Yale and all the big, whatever. If you were to do it by lottery, I mean, you take a look at how our juries are selected. They are brought in by lottery, but they are not placed by lottery. They are then evaluated. And when you're looking at it from a security perspective in terms of who should be there versus just who is randomly selected, that's how this will happen. And we will still have people just being pulled out of Harvard and Yale and wherever else. Basically, you've got your group of people who are eligible, and then we randomly select from that pool. And I don't know if that's any better. If we did an actual lottery from across all of the people in the country, and if you made that automated, and my paid work is in IT security, and I just see that being immediately manipulated. And yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting concept. And maybe it's just because I have no actual direct experience with seeing something like this happen and work. I'm seeing a lot of problems. More questions than solutions at this point. Just my feedback.
So great, thank you. So in terms of facilitation, really quick, we usually do things where people can jump on Stack, and then you have the round. So anyone who hasn't spoken will get to you as soon as possible. So Ian wants to jump in on Stack, and then we have Rich, who would be the next person who's spoken the least. Okay. So Ian, it's your turn, and then we would go to Rich.
Hey, Adora. Yeah, good concerns. You know, I think there's always imperfect implementations, and the devil's in the details with any system that you have, right? I think for what most sortition advocates are looking for is truly random selection, or potentially stratified sampling if you can't get access to the whole population, and do a truly simple random sample and get a large enough sample size to be representative. In that case, you wouldn't necessarily have people opt into some sort of pool where it's just the Harvard and Yale folks that are ending up being decision makers. And I think the way that I conceive of this, it's good to kind of make this very different from the way that you conceive of like legislators, people who are making this their career. There's lots of different proposals for sortition. But I think kind of the best use is like these short-term representative random samples to weigh in on a single decision, much like a jury. And then they could hire people like department heads to, run the show or do the implementation executive type work. But I think the key thing is like who should decide who is doing that work and whether or not they get to continue to do that work on behalf of the public. And I think just representative samples are a good way to make sure that that happens. As far as the security concerns, I think, that's another thing that I don't know very much about. But it seems like we're able to make other electronic systems work with relative security. And it's not, if it was a single individual that you're selecting, huge potential for risk with selecting the wrong person. But we're selecting like kind of large representative random samples. And specifically, this would be, most of us, I think, prefer what's called multi-body sortition, where the decision-making process is divided into functional steps as well. So like there's one group that comes up with a proposal and another group that it's a larger representative sample to evaluate their work and decide if it becomes law, if that makes sense.
Great. Ruby, you just jumped in. If you want to check in and say hi real quick, you're welcome to do that. And then we'll go to Rich. And then John. You're on mute. Yeah, go for it.
Just dropping by. I've never been to one of these before.
Cool. Well, we're talking about sortition and decision-making and decentralized democracy. And then you might go into the logistics afterwards. So you're welcome to jump in, and we'll just have you chime in later if you want to. So let's go to Rich next on round, and then John, and then myself. And if anyone wants to get on stack, you just jump in, raise your hand. Yes, check.
So I understand the apprehension by those people that are not familiar with sortition. I guess I would suggest that there are plenty of resources. First of all, there are some real life resources. The one that most of us refer to because it's had some really great success, although I have been involved, or at least I should say I've witnessed the running of a citizens assembly, which was a sorted process in a town north of San Francisco. But for others, I would encourage you to look up Ireland and how Ireland used sortition to determine whether they were going to allow having a ban on abortion left in their constitution. The process is there's some very short videos to give general ideas of how the process worked. This is only one way to use sortition through a citizens assembly, but this form was quite successful, quite reflective of the actual national. They had a plebiscite afterwards, or a vote to validate basically what the assembly came up, the results of the assembly, and the vote was very similar to the percentage that it passed in the citizens assembly there. But and it's a broad topic, and if I get the skeptics, but we also need to remember that there's not going to be one process that is going to be perfect. There is no perfection in this field. What we need to be thinking about is how can we improve upon the process that we have right now, which is deeply flawed. And so I encourage anybody, obviously, to reach out to me, others that are involved with the sortition movement, and be glad to refer all sorts of links to get you up to speed and get you on board with at least getting an understanding of how this process can work effectively.
Cool. Next is John. Any links you can provide here today too would be great. I got this one from Ian. John, you're next on the round.
So I'm interested in sortition and how to maybe implement them into movement building. What I think is a key power of sortition is to make more efficient decisions. So if you've ever been in a direct democracy, you know how incredibly time-consuming and slow it is for people to make decisions. So imagine you have an organization of 200 people using direct democracy to make a decision. It just takes forever. Sortition is randomly select people. Say out of that 200, you select 25 people. By reducing the amount of participants, you immensely reduce the communication costs and just only 25 people out of 200 have to participate. So it's just an enormous cost reduction. And the other, elections also do that. So the other alleged benefit of sortition is that, sometimes when you're starting to elect and re-elect people, movements can get captured by, the elites that are able to be in these elections time and time again. So, it might make it that the movement gets captured by something that's out of touch. Whereas if you at least have a sortition component, maybe that might make sure that the movement continues to, support the people that the bottom of the movement rather than the top.
Right. So I believe I am next on the round, and then after me, go back to Kyle, and then Andorra, and then Ian and Ruby. Okay, so the thing that I would start with is that, one of the concerns was that random people aren't exactly, experts on their particular decision that you're trying to do. But I would also say that elected politicians are by far the least of all expert on anything. If anything, elected politicians are expert at raising money and supporting big money special interests. Because that's really their only qualification at this point in time is how do they, or how can they basically manipulate and con people to voting for them in any way possible that they can, and get as many votes regardless of how they get those votes. And that's what's just insane about it, is the idea that we wouldn't have standards for integrity and all that in our electoral systems. So going back to the decentralized democracy with the sortition, for me, I love sortition. I love the idea of it. I also love a lot of other ideas related to decision making and democracy, but I can't share those ideas because we don't even have a democracy, right? So for me, democracy comes first. And from everything I've heard with sortition is a step 2. So a step 2 means, okay, once we have democracy, once we have a group of people making decisions, one of the very first decisions we can make is, okay, it is time to do sortition and and select randomly people to, make decisions on our behalf. So in that context, I still have not thought of a way to be able to set up sortition in a automate, or not even automated, just decentralized way. That is just like, first you come together as a group of people who are empowered, and then you decide to implement sortition. So in essence, it's a number 2. So I'd love to hear more about how that's possible. But otherwise, I don't have any issue with sortition along with a dozen other democratic models being a step 2, that, okay, once we empower the people to make decisions ourselves, then we can start doing sortition and implementing that as a top priority. So I'll definitely link the models of decentralized democracy that I'm working with and make sure that's in the notes, and then I'll just pass it on to the next person from there. We have 13 minutes left on this topic. So the next person is Kyle.
Hello. I'd just like to say that sortition here is a great option for a number of decisions. And if we're going to seriously consider it, one of the steps to considering it should be what situations, what type of administration does it lend itself to best? How best and most fairly can we utilize this tool? And in what situations is it the most unfair? Like if it's a situation where the average citizen will have no horse in the race whatsoever, or even no idea what's going on, or it may even be possible that the average person's information on the subject is captured by AM radio hosts, then it becomes a situation where you do need to vet a group of experts, or even apathy. What happens when you select someone that's apathetic and they don't want to actually carry out their duty or role? What happens when a third of an entire group happens to be this way because of statistics eventually? I guess I'm just saying we got to find the right applications for sortition, because there's no such thing as a perfect selection method, but there is such a thing as the right tool for the right job.
Great, great. And Dora.
Okay, I would agree with that statement. I guess from thinking about it in terms of an application that would work, for example, when you're talking about the homeless community, one of the problems with it is that it's very much the homeless industry tells homeless people what they need and then expects them to jump through those hoops. And getting them to simply ask homeless people, what do you need, is like it takes an act of God. It's ridiculous. And if you've ever had to survive that world, the amount of, they need to be asking people what they need. Let's just jump to that. So I could see where this model would work in terms of randomly choosing people surviving homelessness to provide feedback on the reality of homelessness in a particular area. Instead of, because the other things that happen is they will choose people who they feel represent their organization well, and things like that. Where I see it being problematic is, like in the town that I live, it's a whole lot of white people and a smaller community of non-white people, and if you randomly select, you're not going to be hitting everything that needs to be discussed. And that's really all I have to throw out there.
Great, thank you. Ian, you are next, and then Ruby. You come after Ian.
Yeah, so I think the key thing is, like, what should we be using democracy for? We should be using democracy to kind of come up with the plans for our mutual concerns, or things that affect everybody. Like, I think land use and water quality and air quality are all kind of important things. There are common pool resources that we need to have everyone weigh in on. And then for decentralization, I'm a big fan of decentralization, but I think to a certain extent, we need to protect those common pool resources. We need agreement on what's the arbitration mechanism, or where is the authority coming from for us to decide on those common pool resources. Because I think there are some, like with those common pool resources, you do need some centralization to decide how are decisions made regarding this finite common pool resource. That being said, as much that as can be safely left up to the individual, that's personally my political philosophy, is I would like as much left up to the individual as possible, as long as everyone's interests can be reasonably protected. But I just think, as far as like what do we need to use democracy for, I think random sampling is useful because it helps to get a picture of what society feels as a whole. Like for the homeless example that Adora was talking about, of course, for issues that affect homeless people, we want to sample from homeless people. But things that govern society in general, like zoning laws that restrict to single-family housing, that makes housing less available, makes it more expensive for everybody, and makes rent higher, like that's something that society can decide on as a whole. Like, what should the zoning exclusions be? And me personally, like, I'm a big fan of land value taxes as well, as something to incentivize like dense development and increased housing without causing an undue burden on like nature and the natural world. And so for all of those things, like, that's something that as a society, like, we don't want to be giving all of our money to bankers, mortgagees, landlords, and that means more affordable housing for people who are currently homeless, as well as people who are currently renting, as well as people who are currently stuck paying a mortgage to a bank.
Nice. Ruby, you're next. On the round, at least. Anyone wants to jump in?
Right. Yeah. So I don't really know like too much about this. I'm kind of new to like the whole scene and everything, but something that I think is worth considering is like, I know it's like random, but maybe it should be random within like certain groups of people, like say like amongst like Latinos in the group, Muslims in the group, or whatever. That's just my opinion, just to kind of make sure like it does at least have one representative from each group.
you can have a body that is selected by lottery randomly of everyone, and then every group that's a significant portion of the population to require representation could file, lobby for a representative, and then a representative could be selected from among that group by lottery.
Yeah. Nice.
Also, stratified sampling is used frequently too to make sure you get a representative from each type of group too.
So, Rich, you're next on Stack, and then John, we're getting close to time. But I should be able to speak, so if anyone else wants to get on Stack, let us know. But Rich, do you want to go next, or you can pass?
The only thing that I would like to add to the discussion, because this is a general discussion about the process of sortition, which is hard to do in a limited amount of time with a mixed different group of people. I am curious, at least finding a way that, is there a possibility for random selection of any kind of leadership within 5051 or the general strike? To me, let's make it practical. Let's actually talk about specifics of could that happen, and how would that or would that not be better than like electing representatives to some kind of again, hierarchical type of organizational leadership.
Perfect. So I think that brings us to topic number 2 and getting more into the logistics of actually changing things in these organizations and movements. John, you're next on Stack. If you have anything you want to add, there's one thing I wanted to add, so I wanted to go on that. But John, did you want to add anything before the next topic?
The one thing I want to add is recently, in last year, Paris had a permanent citizen assembly created, and they passed their first bill. And it was on the homelessness crisis in Paris, and they did come up with a large amount of recommendations to help reduce homelessness, which was, I thought, when I read through it, was relatively, I guess, progressive. But I think in general, when like these citizen assemblies are usually more tolerant of other cultures than the public at large, because in these citizen assemblies, when you randomly choose people to come together, they're sort of forced to interact with other people, other diverse people, and that just makes you more tolerant when you're exposed to them. So that's one benefit of these citizen assemblies.
Nice. All right. Anyone else want to go on Stack besides me for ending this topic? Otherwise, we can go on to the next topic. So I just want to add a few things. The more I learn about sortition, the more it's not completely random. There's always, I would call it more like semi-random. Like, what are the criteria? What is the pool of the people? For example, let's say you randomly chose people that didn't even speak English. You can't exactly force people who speak English or not speak English to work together, but maybe you can. And then from there, the other idea I had, and this might relate towards topic 2, is selecting somebody who has the power to select another person. So that's semi-random, where you're randomly selecting someone, but then that person might have a role of selecting someone else to represent them in essence. The only other thing I'll mention is that I'm all about demographic democracy, which also pertains to this, and consensus-based democracy, like ensuring that every viewpoint is heard. And that can be done through demographic representation and also through consensus, right? To at least make sure everyone's heard, even if you're striving to consensus. Can't get consensus, you can at least verify that every single dissent or other perspective has been heard. 3 minutes left, so let's go over to Ian, and then I think we're ready to go to the next topic.
Yeah, Jay, that's a really good point. So I think if consensus is important, which I believe it is as well, I think consensus-based decision-making is ideal, then you would want to set up whatever kind of group you're selecting to make decisions based on consensus. The greatest consensus possible for that group is what the group should do, and that's my personal political philosophy. I think kind of like we were talking about multi-body sortition, which is this theoretical approach by this guy Terry Bricious, who served with Bernie Sanders as a politician in Vermont and kind of designed this theoretical approach. His multi-body sortition, the idea is that for groups that are designing policies, that's totally a bigger time commitment. So those might be a smaller group that's stratified sampling. So if 25% of your population is Hispanic, then at least 25% of those attendees Their seats are reserved for people of Hispanic background or whatever, right? And so those smaller initial groups to kind of come up with proposals, they probably should use stratified sampling, should use like sampling from willing populations, whereas like after they come up with a proposal, then the group that evaluates the proposal and decides if it becomes law is maybe a truly simple random sample of everybody. You would, provide people with the resources who, if they don't speak the language, to get interpretation and hear the pros and cons against this policy that other citizens have created, and then they will all vote like private voting after they've been through this process to basically hear the trial of should this bill become law and decide if it does.
Cool. All right, so we're at time here. And the proposal for the second topic would be more on like logistics. So a lot of different interesting things came up in terms of like, creating new positions. How do you clarify decision making? How can you formalize documentation roles? How would we actually go about implementing new ideas like sortition into existing movements, specifically 5051 and general strike? So some of the desired outcomes would be how to go about implementing logistical changes in including decision making itself, right? Like sortition. So does that sound like a good topic? Or the other topics, are there any objections to this topic or other desired outcomes we would want to add? And then we'll just jump right into it if there's agreement. So I'm not hearing any objections. So I think we have agreement on topic 2, kind of more of like logistics of how to actually make some of these changes and some of the difficulties. They're different difficulties, but they're also very similar between 5051 and general strike and other movements. So who would like to start? Otherwise, we do have our round that we could just jump into the next person, which would be, in this case, Kyle.
I would like to start, and I'm next in the round.
Perfect. I love it.
We're right in my wheelhouse. All right. So a lot of fair decision making can be boiled down to identifying the class of problem you're dealing with, and that's why I provided this archive of algorithms to live by, and identifying the solution. Is it a limit-based solution? Is it an algorithm-based solution? Or is it a solution where you need to source the answer from the public? Because a lot of the time, the fair answer is going to be one that's nobody's going to want to vote for, but it's going to be fair. And you're going to know it's fair because everybody will be looking at it with equal distaste. Like, there's no way for me to get a leg up there at all. Typically something that's contentious, the boring option, and this is why I linked the trust thing in the video on game theory. The boring option of I will do unto you as you do unto me, but I'll be forgiving in case your first offense was a mistake, is the survival strategy that works if there's anyone else out there cooperating. I've included Conway's Law because however we organize our basic structure for communicating information and making decisions, if we leave it decentralized, the structure that's going to be produced is always going to be decentralized. It's going to be hard to make anything centralized. Conway's Law is an information parity law. Literally happens to hold a bunch of pull inside the business world. And you can literally look at org charts and then the software that was produced by that development team and see the eerie similarity, hence how it originally got noticed by the John Conway Game of Life fellow. And you can look into addressing certain things like social cohesion limits, like Dunbar's number, which is how big of a group can typically be sustained around a certain social cell, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs to get an idea of a rough estimate of the needs of the people within those social cells. Find as much as you can solve with math in terms of making things fair before you pull out voting is the key takeaway from my little opening keynote here.
Wow, okay. So that brings us to Andorra. Oh yeah, nice. Andorra's next.
Okay.
You can always pass, dude.
I guess the only thing that I would add at this point is my concern is when you're dealing with the kind of work that is being planned by this group, you have a very real possibility of bad actors trying to sneak in and pass themselves off. And if you don't have some way of vetting them from the pool of people who you are choosing from, then you have a possibility of just choosing to put them in charge.
I have a test for that from a world famous authority on fascists and authoritarianism.
Oh, okay, cool. That's literally my only thought.
Okay, cool. Ruby, you are next. And then Rich, and then John.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know too much. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. You can just pass. It's perfectly fine. And we'll just come right back to you when it's your turn again. All good. If you have something to chime in, just jump on stack, raise your hand. So that brings us to Rich. Thanks, Ruby.
Yeah, I pass.
Okay, Rich is going to pass. Okay, brings us to John.
I'll pass too.
John's going to pass. Okay, that brings us to me. All right, so a lot going on here. The main things I would say is just kind of going back to the decentralization. I mean, for me, there's three components. There's centralized models and there's distributed models. And then you have decentralized models. And for me, what's important about decentralization is that decentralization by definition includes centralization, right? For example, even just democracy by itself requires centralization of voting, of knowing where to go to vote. If you do not know where to go to vote, you're not empowered. So empowerment by definition is a centralized process because you need to have everybody know where they need to go to get their power. Whereas in a distributed system, everyone's just distributed and there's no place you go to get anything, right? So one of the great things about that model is the concept, the term I use in the vocabulary, it's kind of silly, but it's the multocracy. So once you get past just basic representative democracy, participatory democracy, and direct democracy, which I call the democratic trilogy, sort of like the foundation of democracy, you get into the multocracy. And in a decentralized way, it's just empowering different models of decision making, I think is very powerful and very important. So as an example, coming into 5051, coming into general strike, I don't think we will be successful if we say, everything should switch to tortition. I think people would be like, that's weird. But if you say, okay, let's just do a practice. Let's just try this one decision with this, and then other decisions can be made in other ways. People be more open to it, or maybe you could have 2 or 3 different models that can either be experimented with, or there could be different types of decisions that are made in different ways. I think in overall, you get to the point where, for me, one of the biggest problems with general strike is the underlying non-decision. Like, it can be very easy to not make decisions and just not want to make decisions. The other thing that people fall into is the idea that somehow polling our decisions. I don't know exactly the best way to put it, but basically, if your poll is the decision of the organization, then the decision makers are the people who wrote the poll. And the decision was decided when the poll was written, not when the people voted on it. Because when you're voting on it, you're just voting on a yes or no question that was then presented to you. So someone made the decision about what was even going to be presented. And I always say that the most important decision always is control of the topic, right? Control of the discussion. If you control what is going to be discussed and what the topic is, you control everything. So that would be similar to the people who get to decide what the poll is that everyone else votes on. But even in that context, usually the poll then is just giving the actual decision makers, guidance on the decision that's going to be made. So in that context, even in 5051, if the poll didn't line up or something happened, it's still possible that the real decision maker would go against what everybody voted on. And even what everyone votes on, there's issues there about who is actually voting and having these open systems. Anyways, I go on and on and on. But going into bad actors, when you have online voting, especially when it actually makes decisions, you have lots of potential for bad actors to be involved. Overall, I'm not particularly worried about bad actors because I believe in democracy. I believe that the majority will make a successful decision. And I do believe in empowerment, that the majority should be allowed, or supermajority should be allowed, to make bad decisions. And that bad decisions sometimes are the things that make us to go to the right direction towards where we need to be. So for me, the vetting process is concerning, but either way, I think it's definitely, you could look at sortition as a vetting process, whether it's going to be random or whether you're going to use certain types of criteria for the sortition. Like I think there was a great term that you used. I couldn't remember what it is, but stratified sampling, I think was your term, quite the term. So anyways, how do you even get started with GSUS? For me, the problem is that everyone wants everything so decentralized that there's like no decision making on the national level, and it's very, I don't even know where to get started on that level, except to just say, like, with decentralized democracy, a group can just come together and start making decisions. And within a decentralized movement like the General Strike, anyone is empowered to come together and create any organization and start making decisions on whatever they want, which is very, very empowering. In 5051, there is such a structure. It's almost the opposite. It's almost too structured, and it raises some flags for me, being like, okay, how did 5051 get so structured so quickly in just, a few months, and now it's like all the Lemmy things, and things are just so tied in, and you have these representatives who are then appointed, and all these things are happening, and the discussions behind, not very transparent. So I can go to my California representative and I can tell them I would like us to propose and consider sortition, and then the California representative will be, okay, well, we'll consider that and maybe we'll bring it up somewhere else. But then from there, where does it go? I have no idea. But that would be my starting point, would be us within, starting a project for sortition, which we have in both groups already, and then trying to percolate that up into the representatives, and then trying to get them to agree to at least experiment with it within California, and then maybe that could go nationwide. Check. So that brings us to Ian.
What happened to the recording?
We just want to say that's fine. I'll start a new one, but that's I got multiple recordings going on, but I like to have the recording on here just so that you can hear it. I like being
recording is on.
I like the noise, so everybody knows that it's recording. Ian, your turn.
Okay, yeah. I also think that who is asking the question and the context of how policies are decided is critical, really important. I think another thing to consider is are we deciding, if we're deciding on an issue based on an organization where membership is voluntary, it's different than if we're deciding an issue for like a country where if you're living inside the country's territory, you have to follow those rules, right? If I decide that General Strike, 5051 are not organizations that I want to be a part of, then I just withdraw my support and I go to an organization that is doing what I want to do. But I think in a moment like we are now politically, and really any time where it seems like the government's not acting in the best interest of people generally, we have the most power if we work together. And so just trying to get the most buy-in possible is really important. And I think sortition is a useful tool for that purpose because it can get a representative sample across the group to kind of come together, discuss, and sort of like a deliberative polling thing where you can have a lot of deep understanding of people's preferences due to like interactions and conversations among the sample that otherwise may not have contact with each other, but then you can set priorities in that way. Again, it's different because 5051, General Strike, they're private groups, they're groups that not everyone has to follow the rules for them, so we can leave and start their own thing, right? But if General Strike and 5051 are wanting to pull together the biggest tent, to have the most support possible in facing an authoritarian, unrepresentative government, then sortition is a useful tool to help find those areas of consensus.
Kyle, we're back to you.
Well, logistically, I can definitely see the merits of sortition in a bunch of situations, especially when it comes to matters of like needing an opinion from a member of the public and ensuring that the board is representative in addressing a given thing. But I think a very important stage to consider is, while there may be the centralized, decentralized, what was the third category you mentioned?
Distributed.
Distributed. I think it's also important to look at how each of those functions along an axis of time, as a function along an axis of time. Because if you have a distributed position that's temporary versus a distributed assigned position that's permanent, temporary versus lifetime versus contingent on performing a specific task versus contingent on a fixed period of time are all things to determine about those positions before you sort people into them. And it's going to be a logistical undertaking to determine what problems we're even solving with the positions. Like, how do we replace the bursar or the comptroller as they exist within present infrastructure to be functionally, proportionally representative to the constituents of this movement and to the constituents outside this movement? Do we act for just the people in this movement, or do we act on behalf of all workers of the world?
And Dora, or Adora. I got that wrong.
Okay, so I think there's been a lot of very interesting points brought up. My concern is that a lot of it feels to me as being kind of academic. What we are dealing with in the immediate moment is a very large number of people who are quite literally throwing their hands up in the air and saying, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And they're waiting for someone to tell them what to do. And while I like all of these ideas that people are throwing around, we need to, the way the culture is and the way the reality of our situation and the way people have been trained in this country, that I think that is going to be the biggest limit on what your options are in terms of how things are, how decisions are made and how decisions are put out there. Because I mean, I am overeducated and I am not young, and this is the first time I've heard of any of this. I'm sure that I'm not unique in that respect. So the question is how do we get through the crisis? Now, in support of what you're saying, I'm also looking around at all this and thinking we need to make fundamental cultural changes, or we are going to keep having this very dangerous pendulum swing. But the cultural changes are, I deal with that at a corporate level, and that is difficult and it is slow. Doing it for an entire country is going to be more so. Not impossible, but there's nothing fast about it. At least in my limited experience. Maybe somebody has other experiences to do with that. But it seems like a separate parallel objective. So I don't know. Again, I have more questions than I have solutions. That's just my thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Ian, you want to jump in here? And Ruby bounced.
Yeah, Adora, really good points that you're raising. And you know, I think I came across sortition kind of by chance, but I feel it clicked immediately into my worldview and sort of like how we reach truth as someone who does like epidemiology type work, like random samples or something that like I have a lot of faith in. And but yeah, I think it was just by chance that I heard of it. As far as like what do we do now? Absolutely, I think there's a huge concern like, well, what should we do now? How do we fix these problems? And I think sortition to me is like the fundamental reform that makes all of the worthwhile reforms possible. Otherwise, it sort of feels like we're just kind of like putting out small fires everywhere. Like to me, all of our decisions are mediated by politicians, and there's a really distortionary process that politicians have to go through in order to become decision makers for us. First of all, they're people who have the time to campaign, and so that usually means that they don't have to work or caregive, or at least they can suspend those things for long periods of time. So they're less likely to be people who are responsible for the well-being of other dependents, and less likely to be people that need to work on a regular basis to sustain themselves. And then those characteristics are, further distorted by, of course, the people who volunteer to rule other people are more likely to be sociopaths and narcissists. Partisan primaries advance partisan policies. You have people who are wealthier or indebted to wealthy people are more likely to be elevated. And this is the reason why we're not likely to get reform on housing if most of the decisions on housing are mediated by people who have passive income streams related to landlording. And so I think kind of the fundamental reform is how do we get actual rule by the people? And to me, that's sortition. And so the thing that I want, the thing that I think we need is my thought is that we basically need constitutional conventions every couple of years that are populated by representative random samples through multi-body sortition is what I think I wanted just a different paradigm for democracy, because I feel like having politicians mediate all of our political decisions always means that we're dealing with corporate arbitrage, we're dealing with people who are not representative of the whole, very distorted, biased sample of wealthy sociopaths making our decisions.
Rich, you are next.
So I want to, once again, when I bring this back down to the micro level, what we're talking about here with 5051 and perhaps the general strike. General strike is perplexing to me because it is so decentralized. I think people are craving, it's like they're craving somebody to take charge, really, which is a little bit scary to me. But in the examples that we talked about before, for example, creating a survey to send out to everybody and then make a decision. However people vote is the way the organization will go. I mean, that's a perfect example where you empower a sortive, for example, citizens assembly. They're the ones that will decide what that question will be on any type of survey that goes out. And what that does is it provides, first of all, the worldviews of many different people chosen randomly, and you can stratify it any way you want to get all the different kinds of people that might be involved in a particular movement, and have that process, those people be the ones to decide that. And remember, we're also not just choosing, the whole idea of sortition is not just to choose the body. There are other steps involved. I mean, I take that back. Sortition is choosing the body randomly, but there are other steps involved in decision making. For example, in a citizens assembly, there are people coming in and to inform the people that have been empowered by random selection on the particular topic, and give them all sides of the topic so that those people that have been chosen for the citizens assembly can make the ultimate decision, right? So it's not just the fact that we're picking somebody randomly to come in to represent, their portion of society, but we're picking them to come in to represent their portion of society and how they would reflect or deliberate on any particular specific topic. So we want to keep in mind that the process is not just singular. It's not sortition is yes, random selection, but there's much more involved in a deliberative democratic process. I hope that makes sense.
Great. So Ian wanted to jump in, and then it is John. Ian, do you have something really quick? Or?
Yeah, sorry. Just really briefly to Rich's point about like studying the question. So back to the Irish citizens assembly that decided the abortion issue. That Irish politicians would never suggest legalizing abortion because they're all very dependent on the Catholic Church and sort of the power that structure has in society. But if you take a representative sample of regular people, the question that they wanted is they said, hey, we should have a referendum on constitutionally legalizing abortion for Ireland. And because you had regular people bypassing these intermediaries, politicians, you got this proposal to legalize reasonable access to abortion, which happened in Ireland in 2016 or something like that.
Great. John.
So I guess if we're talking about like what we can do, what's the actions that people can take, I've always been skeptical about a lot of of these actions that people can take. I feel like the biggest action that people can take is if you want to challenge oligarchic power, you need to be able to actually challenge the power. You need to have power in order to take the power, right? And one of the prime things that the economics is that the oligarchs or whatever, they just have so much more money. But with masses of people, they're also capable of raising masses of money collectively. And so, for example, like I just looking on General Strike, 300,000 people have signed up. Like, let's imagine half of those people donate $100 per year. That's $15 million a year. Let's imagine somehow in the future, 3 million, you can get 3 million people to participate. That's $150 million per year. That's like a significant amount of cash that could be actual power that could be used to actually threaten elected politicians to actually implement democracy rather than just petition elected officials for democracy. And the challenge has always been how to organize 3 million people, which is why I'm a big fan of sortition.
Are you raising your hand, Kyle?
Yeah, and I think I'm head up next.
Oh, well, I was before you, but yeah, go first. Go for it, and then me after you.
I just want to say that private organizations always have a vested interest, like by definition, a profit motive, when it comes to warping legal language to find technicalities in it. And one of the big risks with sortitions is that when you're putting lay people in that position, they don't have the trained ability to legislate and make sure that the wording of the law that they produce is in line with the spirit of the policy they intend to carry out.
Rich.
Well, Kyle, who would then?
I believe that people are trained specifically in legislation and rhetoric and could be found and appointed to committees alongside people who have been sorted to provide the legal language for them. But we would probably need some form of capital punishment for them if they had gotten up to some form of intentional loophole creation.
Could there not be the same information given by those experts that you would empower to make or to share the decision making? Could those experts not be the ones to give the information to the lay people that will be ultimately making the decision? That's the way it's, in my understanding, in the citizens' assemblies that I've observed and read about and so forth, studied. That's how that's gone, and there hasn't been this great catastrophic, horrible result that has come up. In fact, research is showing that the decisions made by these citizens' assemblies, for example, are generally the ones that most of the population would agree with. Now, if you're talking about a particular specific company, I mean, again, there are ways to use sortition in selecting the experts that you have run a company. I mean, we can go into that realm if you'd like. But the idea of using sortition, I mean, I'm getting off a little bit. Let me give one example. For example, we could come up with a way to choose the Supreme Court justices through sortition. We collect the names based upon a number of different groups' submissions of people that would be great Supreme Court justices in their opinion, and then choose them randomly. every certain year, every certain amount of years. Would that not apply also in the situation you're talking about, Cal, or am I way off?
It's significantly off, especially even the description of that situation. If you're randomly assigning them, that won't lead you to an even representative distribution. That can typically lead to very concentrated groups, especially if you're picking randomly, where we could be all beholden to the most right or left wing assortment of justices by a simple roll of the dice.
I think it depends on the numbers, doesn't it?
The problem I was addressing is if you're writing law and you don't have expertise in writing law, external actors with a profit motive to subvert the law will attempt to do so, whether that's by pushing authored bills like we've seen from think tanks and the Heritage Foundation in Congress right now, or whether that's by having citizens who don't want to actually carry out their full duty just take an easy, this is the My Plank platform talking point. We would end up beholden to Derbyshire law again with a first past the post thing where the popularity of a talking point and the court of public opinion ended up being the thing that dictated a lot of our policy, instead of actual figures like how much drinking water we can preserve or what an acceptable safe level according to repeated rigorous research is for toxins in our water.
So I'm going to jump in here. I would recommend us taking a little pause. This is very good that we're getting excited and getting into it, but we just are running out of time on this topic. I think we should extend the time. We also have Jace who jumped in. So unless someone's just like pressing to say something immediately, there's a lot of things I would like to say, but let's just check in with Jace. If you want to check in, and then we could check in on our time and then maybe continue this topic. So Jace, did you want to say hi? And
hi. Hopefully I'm in the right place. I was trying to. Is this just a general strike welcome?
No. So you are in the wrong place. So the general strike welcome is going to be in the general strike server in the group meeting. So it's one of the group channels. You just scroll down to the bottom of the voice channels.
Okay.
Yeah. So you just clicked on the link in a different meeting. So just go back to the Discord on general strike and then scroll down to the bottom, and you'll see there's literally like 20 people in the meeting. Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, appreciate it.
No problem.
Bye.
Great. And just so people know, when we used to do this session in the actual general strike server, there was like 10 people who would jump in and out. So one person jumping in and out, really good. So John, you are next on Stack. I would recommend we just check in very quickly to make sure everyone's down to extend the topic. And if I need to leave, but if John, you want to go first, like I'm not going to prevent you, but if you want to just quickly check in on the topic, but before we jump in or continue, John.
Oh, sure. I just like to make a quick comment about expertise sortition. If you've ever been in a direct democracy, it's very commonplace for even direct democracy for the participants of it to elect people, to choose people to become experts for them, or to even choose people to become leaders for them. My co-op, we had specialized, people running it, and we hired, like the expertise when we needed it. So, things like sortition doesn't mean that there's no experts. They just get hired by the assembly. So, and if you want more experts, you can hire more experts. So I don't think that's that's not like there's not going to be no expertise. There's going to be expertise. There's going to be as much as the people want.
Cool. Excellent. So, Rich says I'm going to have to leave the meeting in a few minutes. If you want to check out Rich real quick, you can. There's a couple of things I wanted to add, but do people want to continue or do people want to kind of wrap up? Because if you want to wrap up, I'll just say one last thing, and then we can do a round of checkouts unless anyone else needs to say anything. Otherwise, we're good. So does anyone want to continue or should we just wrap up? Because it's been an hour, a little over an hour. So if no one says anything, I would say let me do my thing because I wanted to say something after John. If anyone needs to check out immediately, you can just check out now, and then we'll do a round of checkouts, and then we'll be done. That sound good? Everyone? Okay. So my turn here. I want to thank Adora because I really like what you said and bringing us down to like the reality of the situation, which is that we do need to figure out where we are right now. I think another way of explaining that in relationship to experts is that you have to. It's like when you're driving your car, no one will ever drive if they didn't trust the other drivers on the other side of the road. You have to trust your community, or we'll never get anywhere, right? And so in the same context, I think the general strike will never happen if we all are focused on never accepting the resilience of our local communities. I believe our local communities are much more resilient than we make them out to be. In the same way with citizens, like random people chosen are not going to be completely off the rockers. Like the majority of those people will know how to get experts, will know when they know things and when they don't know things, then will be able to gauge different concepts. So I like the concept of going into sociocracy. So what's really interesting in the relationship of sociocracy with sortition is that if you think about it, sortition is the definition of sociocracy when the decision that's being made affects everybody. Because if the decision being made affects everybody, the best way to have a scientifically study about that particular decision is a random selection of the population. So for me, the core of all of it is scientific democracy, understanding science in the concept of decision making, which for me, sociocracy, along with demographic representation to ensure that every point of view is represented if the random sample missed that particular goal is very, very essential. So going back to 5051 and specifically in general strike, I think that the best way to move forward with a lot of these things is prioritization. And what that means is that we need to look at the list of priorities that these organizations and these movements have. And then we need to find and prioritize a specific thing and target that. So for example, the perfect intermediary between them was May 1st. May 1st was like perfect because it was going to be general strike, it was going to be strike, labor movements, all this stuff, and 5051 all working together, but it didn't happen. The 5051 chose to go with the 19th of April, which is fine. Maybe next year we'll do the May 1st and unite all that stuff. But so it's finding a targeted, specific decision that you can work around, I think is the best way to present it. So the question would be, what decision is the perfect decision to apply to this logistical solution, for example, like sortition? In terms of just like getting excited about all of the democracy and everything going on with the movements, I'm a big fan of the conventions. Ian was actually mentioning the conventions too, and just understanding the power of conventions and that people coming together in assemblies and in convention models have power already. We do not have to ask permission for the power. The people technically have all the power that's not delegated to the states and the country. So in that, I think the biggest thing that we could do is to stop giving all our money to the big money special interests and like the big money candidates, and instead giving the money to organizing. So I really liked what was said about, even as little as $15 between 300,000 people is a massive power. And we actually talked before this meeting a couple hours ago about the strike funds and all the money that we're raising for the general strike. What would it mean if 5051 started raising money? I know there is some money going on there, and it'd be interesting to get more updates. So maybe on Tuesday night we'll hear more about it. But anyways, I'll stop there. I want to thank everyone for coming. So my checkout is that this was an amazing session. Again, next week, same time, same place. I'm going to be scheduling some more kind of overall coalition building introductory sessions to try to get more people into, collaborating between movements and just in more public, facing just discussions. And with that said, thank you for coming. I will be back next week. I'm just excited to hear more about how to do this, and I will be doing everything I can to figure out how to implement these ideas into both general strike and 5051. And we do have a session on Monday night within general strike to figure out, ideally with the strategy team, to figure out how to just address decision making, how to build better decision making apparatus at the national level and be more functional. And anyways, I'll stop there. So thanks again. And next in line to check out would be Adora, but if someone needs to leave immediately, you can check out fast. All good.
I don't really have anything to say, so I'll just pass.
Oh, but you can just check out and say how the session went for you and anything you're going to be working on between, you know.
I thought this was very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of working on in between, since I'm not actually in charge of anything, I will continue my floundering around looking for places that I can plug in, and that's pretty much it.
Cool. Right. Who wants to go next to check out?
I'll go next.
Okay.
Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate that, Jay, and I look forward to perhaps maybe even a committee of a couple of people trying to come up with something really practical in terms of a decision-making process for 5051 in the future.
Yes. Ian, and then Kyle. Want to check out? And then we'll go to John.
Yeah, thanks so much for facilitating these, Jay. It's nice to talk with other people who are trying to consider like the problems that we're facing with a government that doesn't represent us, and just how we can best ensure our long-term flourishing and survival as regular people. And nice to meet you guys. Look forward to talking more with all of you soon.
Great, John.
Yeah, thanks for facilitating a great session.
Cool. Yeah, thank you guys for letting me at least attempt to get topics. That was a good first time we've done that, so that was awesome. From there, I just used the simple, just going around, make sure everyone gets a chance to speak, and then having stacks. So not too much facilitation going on, but I'll be back next week and just have a wonderful week and day. Any other last comments or anything? Yeah.
Yep.
Kyle?
For my checkout, I'll be organizing for the wiki thing.
Is that after
this? Recording of decision making at meetings like this into a format where it's easy for anybody who spins one up to contribute what their group was comprised of and what they decided. Get that into a spot where everybody can easily just track it, and then maybe hold elections for the administrators and open some job positions and hold elections for people to fill those positions from the pool of applicants. Also, anytime you leave hiring experts as part of the thing, you end up orienting the writing of the law towards capital because they're hired, they're paid.
Interesting. Great. Thank you, Kyle. And when is the wiki call? Is that coming up real soon?
I believe that's at 8:30 Eastern, so it's in about an hour and 10 minutes.
An hour, cool. Excellent. Yes, I definitely have so many questions for 5051 in terms of like where all the information is and how things work. And there's definitely a lot of things that aren't particularly accessible publicly, but same thing with that. So I'm glad we're working on the wiki, and hopefully that will help make more things accessible. So excellent. If anyone did want to stick around, I'm certainly willing to stick around a little longer. Otherwise, I'm going to join the welcome call, and I will just talk to y'all later. Good work.
Bye. Catch you later.
Ciao.